Hi, Bob Mack here, and welcome back to The Interval. With me is a Philadelphia-centered musician who's been at his craft and trade for many, many years, puts out stuff that's young, hip, and he's perfected, I think, the art of melody and songwriting. With me is Cliff Hillis. Cliff, welcome to The Interval.
Thanks so much. Oh, it's great to be here.
I appreciate you spending the time with us and making the time to be with us.
Absolutely.
And the reason why I'm pleased that you've got the time, because you've been a busy guy.
Yeah, it's been a pretty busy summer and spring and such.
Recall in the spring you were down in South America?
Yeah, one of the bands I play with is the Orchestra starring former ELO members. It's a mouthful, but that's like legally they have to, because it's not Jeff Lynne's ELO.
Right.
And and I travel some crazy places with those guys, and we did Santiago, Chile, Lima, Peru, and it was amazing. Yeah.
And are you playing ELO material?
Yeah, it's all just the hits of ELO.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you get into that?
It was almost by accident, I'd say. A number of years ago, I was just at this music seminar thing in Philly, and I happened to sit next to Gordon Townsend, who's the drummer in the band. He's been the drummer for a long time in that band. And we were chatting, and it's like, hey, what do you do? What do you do? And so he was like, yeah, we became friends and on Facebook and such, and we knew a ton of mutual people, even though we hadn't met face-to-face before, and they were looking for somebody to basically fill in for Glenn Burtnick, who's the bass player, because he's the busiest man in rock and roll. His band, The Weaklings, plays in like just countless bands, and so they were looking for somebody to kind of fill in on shows he couldn't do. Somebody who liked Beatle type music, ELO music, played bass and sang, and I was like, I do those things. Yeah. And so I did some rehearsing with them, and then I did a few shows, and now I'm mostly full-time. Sometimes I fill in for Glenn on bass, and sometimes I play acoustic guitar and sing extra harmonies. So it's tons of fun.
That's super cool. Do you have to audition for that? Did you have to fly out somewhere and meet with the band?
The rehearsals often happen in New Jersey, like up pretty well up there in New Jersey at Eric Troyer, the keyboard player's house. He's got a really great studio set up. That's where they do a lot of rehearsing, because there's a few, U.S. guys, all East Coast, and then there's a couple of Brits.
So you had a spring tour, where you have a fall tour. When you go back out with these guys?
Some dates are just coming in now. It's been a slowish summer, but every spring, generally, the band for the last many years, I've probably done it 5 times with them now, play at Epcot down at Disney, and we'll do like 4 nights, and that's the dates are coming in for that. That'll be in the spring. Do 4 nights there. Just got confirmed for this 70s rock and romance cruise, which is fun. I did it with them this past spring, but it's happening again. So, and then there's some chatter about going back to South America, because the band has been very well received there, and used to go down regularly before COVID, and now it's sort of finding its way back. So might be some fun travels in the next spring.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And along with that, you also have your own music life. You have your own songs and albums and performances to come.
Yeah.
You've just put out an album that I've fallen in love with, Be The Now.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Just Drive is a phenomenal song.
Oh,
and,
thank you.
There's the others, like Good Morning.
Good Morning and Good Night.
And Good Night. Love that song too.
XPN's been really kind to give that some good spins.
Yes, you're definitely a featured artist on XPN.
Yeah, they're great.
And it's great. What was the genesis of that album, and where did the term, Be The Now is kind of like a kind of cool hip 60s term.
Oh, cool. Yeah, well, thank you. It's just kind of crazy. I didn't realize the comparison until after it was out, but basically the title of that, I had been working on those songs kind of through the lockdown times, and so the songs are a little varied. Everything I do, I'm a big fan of the 60s and 70s, kind of just that vibe.
Yeah.
But I try to, I like writing things that I feel like fit in with today's music, but with a lot of that character, and also just loving melody and Beatlesque harmonies. But the title of that, I actually awoke from a dream one morning, and my dad, who passed away in 2006, I'm just in my dream, vividly talking with him, and he just says, "Be the Now." He's literally, and I was like, oh, and I woke up, I was like, I have no idea exactly what that means, but I'm using that as a good omen, and then I was like, that could be a great title. No, it had not been used before that I could find. Somebody pointed out to me just recently that like the Beatles, Let It Be, like Paul McCartney had, you know, Mother Mary came to him in a dream. I was like, well, all right.
You gotta run with that.
It's good enough for Paul, it's good enough for me.
Absolutely. That's a cool story. And it's neat that you bring up the 60s influences, because I wrote down Graham Nash.
Oh, yeah.
When I listened to you, I felt like you evoke Graham Nash.
Oh, thank you. I don't get that a lot, and I love, take that.
Do you remember like a song, any song when you were super young?
Yeah.
Like that you just had to listen to as a little kid? Anything that just caught your attention and just obsessed you?
Yeah, I could say. So when I was a little tiny kid, I have a brother. My brother Roger's 3 years older, so he was always kind of, and he was into music instantly. We played in bands together. But so I would, hear things that he had growing up, which and being a few years older, it's like whatever rock and roll stuff he was listening to, I was like, oh, cool. But when I was a little tiny kid, I remember one of the first records when we had like a little record player, and there's a 45, and it was Albert Hammond song "I'm a Train," and he, he was kind of a fairly big 60s, 70s artist, I guess. That song, we would listen to it constantly, and I realized later it sounds very much like Simon and Garfunkel, so interesting. And we had a Bay City Rollers 45, Rock and Roll Love Letter. So those two, I just remember us playing them all the time when I was a little kid.
Okay. And when did you pick up an instrument?
I was about 9 years old, and my brother and I got Sears guitars for Christmas because we were asking, and they were just goofy little acoustic guitars. But we went and got some guitar lessons from this old guy, which was really kind of fun, just for a short bit. And I basically just kind of taught myself. But my brother ended up kind of becoming a bass player. But I just would. The first song I wrote, and I was like 9 years old, a song. It was called "I Can't Go Home," and I was just hitting the strings like I can't go home. I was just trying to be creative, but had no idea what I was doing. But I played that guitar a lot, and my parents were really supportive of my brother and I growing up.
And where were you growing up?
Grew up born in Wilmington, Delaware. I grew up down in Rehoboth Beach, actually. So it was fun. It was a really great place to grow up as a kid and a teenager. But yeah, my brother would play Cheap Trick live at Budokan all the time, and that's became my favorite band, actually. There's a picture of me when I was like 10 years old, dressed up like Rick Nielsen for Halloween.
Nice.
Little hat, like doing that. So.
And did you play in any of the organized venues of education, whether band or orchestra? Or
there was. They called it stage band. It was it was jazz band, but we did like pop rock songs and stuff, and So my brother was in that, and then actually it was a cool thing. I got some of the sheet music, and I couldn't really read music, but chords. But I did some studying, when it came time, and it was really helpful playing in the, played gigs in front of people. I would have like little guitar solo moments.
Right.
So that was really good.
Were your parents into music? Were they listening to a lot of music?
They were big music fans. My mom played the piano. She actually played some classical piano, and it was interesting because she only read. So she had her favorite pieces, and she would sit down, and for years we didn't have a piano in the house. But when we moved to the beach, we got a nice little piano, and she would play her pieces, but she could only just read. And it's funny thing is, my brother and I always just play by ear mostly. I've learned a lot more with all the bands I've played with. I've had to get a little more studious, but
right. And you're hearing a lot of other, you're hearing melody all the time, right?
Yeah.
In different patterns and progressions. It's a great influence.
Yeah.
And migrating through high school, you're a professional musician now. Music is your life. Was it always going to be that way for you, or were you looking at studying or going to some other?
Yeah, for the most part. I think I was 15 years old when we played our first gig, and there was the band, friends down the beach, my brother on bass, and we played at Pockets' Teen Club, and we had a bunch of friends, so we came. They all came out. It was a packed night, and I think it was just that that gig was like, whoa, this is cool. Okay. And I always took me a while. I was a Beatles fan, but to really become a completist, it was a little bit later on. Mm-hmm. But then I was kind of hooked, after hearing that stuff and playing a few gigs in front of people and sometimes even getting paid.
Right. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
Coming more towards the present, are you relying on performance to make a living, or do you do other things?
Yeah, well, luckily I've avoided having like a day job for a very long time, but I've always played in a bunch of different bands, and for several years I worked with some bands that were touring bands as guitar tech, and so I kind of was on that side of it, and that was pretty amazing because this band, The Innocence Mission from Lancaster, is like 1996. I was a fan and kind of friends with the band. Did 3 tours around the U.S. with them as tech. It was just like roadie.
Yeah, it's a pretty good sized band, right?
Yeah, and we were open. The first thing was opening for Natalie Merchant on one of her albums, so that was wild. And then the last one I did, the bass player's wife was having a baby and he couldn't do it, and it was opening for Emmylou Harris on her Wrecking Ball tour, which is such a great album. And they asked me if I'd play bass and fill in, so I would set things up, go change my shirt, and then play, and it was amazing. That was so. I just always tried to be well-rounded. I've always had a little recording setup, and now it's over the last many years. I worked in a studio when I lived in Delaware before moving to Phoenixville, which is where my wife and I have been for about 18 years. But I worked in a studio for a while, and I've always had studio stuff, so between recording bands or mixing and mastering, which is mostly what I do these days, making my own records, and all the things in between. Right.
And you've co-written with other artists.
Yeah. Years ago, I made a point. I decided, something I wanted to try to pursue. I felt like, I think I was pretty easygoing with the demeanor, and I had a couple, of writing sessions with people. And the first official exciting one that I was really psyched about was I did a show with the band the Rembrants, the guys from the Friends theme, and this was like 2007, 6, and got on a bit with Danny Wilde, basically the lead singer, and he still lives in LA, but I was making a trip out there, and I was like, hey, would you ever want to write a song together? And he was like, I think he was surprised. He was like, yeah, sure. Gave me his number, his email, and I ended up going out, and we wrote 2 songs the first time we got together, and then I wrote a couple more. And then I just started, when I would do shows with people that maybe the more national stature than myself, if it felt right, I'd be like, hey, would you be interested in co-writing? And so I've done it a handful of times.
I wanted to talk about a little bit about you collaborating with Rhett Miller,
oh, yes,
97s too, which is really notable and cool. But you said the ASCAP reference, ASCAP was set up to make sure the artist got paid.
Yep.
You had to join. You had to get a certain level of qualification. But they also helped you with the royalty process.
Yes, indeed.
Is that no longer valid now?
Well, it's valid. It's just that, there used to, so there was the record companies, and there was this sort of like, they were the gatekeepers for, people making records. Now, indie artists get found on being on an Apple commercial or whatever. But, with all of the streaming and all of that, pretty much, making money has changed a lot.
It's been a thrill to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
And every time I meet a new artist, I learn so much, and I've learned so much from you.
Oh, great.
It's really
thank
great.
You. Appreciate the invite. It's been great chatting.
There you have it. Go search YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, SoundCloud, all your favorite streaming platforms. If I leave anything out, Apple Music.
Apple Music, all that.
And find Cliff Hillis and listen to Be the Now. You'll thank me later in the comments. You better. I would appreciate that. Remember to subscribe and like this episode. Thanks for watching.
Fame and fortune you deserve. An encyclopedic baseball fan singing your way across the land. Old Dan